I am John Atack, and you are Spike Robinson.
Yeah.
What are the penguins called?
The only one that has a name is this fellow here who is Muck and Fuss.
Muck and Fuss. Well,
He's the only
hey,
one with a name.
okay. Poor are the penguins. Right, anyway, that's enough of that. Uh, I'm foolish enough without making it any worse. We're going to talk about a statement that Ron Hubbard Jr. made. Ron Hubbard Jr. was born in 1934. He was the first acknowledged child of Lafayette Ronald Hubbard. By his first marriage. He, of course, had three marriages, but no second marriage. If you look at his statement on the shrinking world of Ron Hubbard, which is on our channel, and everybody should watch. It's an incredible
Yeah.
interview.
Link in
Charlie Nair.
description below.
Yes, link in description below. So the first wife, Polly, Margaret Louise Grubb, gave him two children. L. Ron Hubbard Jr., and if you read Dianetics, the Modern Science of Mental Health, you'll find out why you shouldn't call your child Junior, but he did. In about 1941, 42, Ron Hubbard was sued by Polly because he'd abandoned her, and he was ordered to pay child maintenance for his son, who's commonly known as Nibs, which is a joke in the interwar years. Kids were called Nibs, his Nibs, meaning the little precious darling. My mum had a friend who was called Nibs. My mum
I
was born in 1917. So there
I
you go.
always thought it was a joke on his father's career, where it was the nib of a pen, much the way that Llewellyn Jones was then called Spike because his father was a railway man.
Who used to write things with the railway spike. Is that what you're saying?
No, but that he got his name from his father's something in his father's career, whereas Nibs is
Well,
no.
I'm
Okay.
sorry to say that not only is it a commonplace, and as I say, my mum had a friend who was called Nibs. His surname was Winterbottom, so you can see why he preferred to be called Nibs. But in fact, L. Ron Hubbard Jr. explains that this is why he was given the name Nibs. So I'm sticking with that. If
Fair enough.
anybody would like to go into the Akashic records with the Lords of Karma and find out why it really is, but you can find it if you look it up. His Nibs is the expression, which is shortened to Nibs, and used of babies, because they're rather demanding, I think. Anyway, he was born in 34. His sister, Catherine, who would later become Catherine Gillespie, was born in 1936. They were abandoned by their father, and even though he was ordered by the court to pay towards the maintenance, he never did. In 1952, when he had achieved his 18th birthday, Nibs decided that he wanted to see the father who he hadn't seen for 10 years, right? The great expert on parenting and the second dynamic, as he called it. And he just turned up in Phoenix, Arizona, where Hubbard had just begun Scientology, because the dear people at the Hubbard Dianetic Foundation in Wichita had said, we're not going to promote courses about reincarnation and past lives. You can forget it. And he angrily stomped off, leaving behind all the rights to Dianetics, including the rights, I believe, to modern science of mental health and science of survival, because they'd gone into a bankruptcy because Hubbard had bankrupted all five of the Hubbard Dianetic Research Foundations, the first foundations. So he has to create this new subject, and along comes Nibs. And I was in touch with Nibs from 1984. He died in 1991, I think. And I did not get close to him, but I was. There's a cassette recording that he released in 1984, which was for me, that he released to the world about his time. You also have his amazing testimony in 1982, May 82, at the Clearwater hearings in Florida. Sadly, the videos are a bit fuzzy, but what he said is quite interesting.
Mhm.
Now, this is a character who So he turns up his father, finds out that his father has a girlfriend who's the same age as him, Mary Sue Whip, who will be his third wife, first and third. Sarah Hollister didn't exist in between. And he, of course, denied paternity of Alexis Valerie, the third child.
I will
You put
say
your finger up.
that's a bit of a, I can see where he does, it's a bit of clever bit of gaslighting, misdirection when I think the phrase is I had no second wife, because actually he is accurate in a totally wrong and upside down way. That is, he married the second one while he was still married to the first one. So thus, the second one wasn't a real marriage. And I've dated guys who use that kind of
Well,
rationalization.
yeah,
So,
I'm sorry to interrupt you. It
oh, no,
evidently is a rationalization
yeah,
because he's told you that he's married to Mary Sue Whip.
yeah.
So he has a second wife. So if he's discounting Sarah because it was a
And
bigamous marriage, as you say, it should be, I wasn't married to that one. My second wife is Mary Sue. You can't have a first and a third, though he did say he wasn't very good at mathematics.
there you go. But it just always struck me as one of those, ha ha, I'm getting away with this lie sort of misdirection.
Oh, it struck me as a man who was extraordinarily tired and blinking a lot and couldn't really associate thoughts properly.
Oh,
As in when he's asked about reincarnation and he pauses as to whether he believes in it. And when Charlie Nairn asked him, but your followers believe in it, he said, oh, yeah, they believe in it. And of course, when he's asked about Swiss bank accounts, the thought that he's on the ball and sharp and all this. No, when he's asked about Swiss bank accounts, he says, there is one Swiss bank account. So he starts denying it and then goes, well, actually, there is one. And it
mm.
had an enormous amount of money in it because I talked to people who ferried money to and from it. So yeah, I think it's just a Freudian petticoat, as they say in
Oh,
the trade.
okay. I was thinking it was narcissistic trickle truthing.
It could be narcissistic trick or treating. But anyway, so Nibs rolls up in 1952, somewhere around about June. His father gives him a handful of amphetamines, which were perfectly legal, and Hubbard frequently recommended amphetamines. There are passages in Dianetics where he does it. There are lectures. If you have to grab hold of anything, grab hold of benzodrine, which is an amphetamine, the inspiration for Narconon drug rehabilitation. There's even a passage in Montana Mental Health where he lists drugs and he says marijuana is probably the safest and alcohol's probably the most dangerous. And that is probably true, actually.
Mm.
But I'm not going to try everything to see,
Oh,
because
broken clock.
a broken clock says that marijuana is safer
No, a
than alcohol.
broken clock is right twice a day.
Yeah, well, only if you look at it.
Moving right.
It's just something about that expression that I don't know why it rubs me up the wrong way. A broken clock is right twice a day. It's one of those meh sort of statements. It's like, so even an idiot can be right occasionally. And in this case, we're talking about Ron Hubbard and amphetamines.
Fair.
And if anybody's particularly interested, I wrote a paper called Never Believe a Hypnotist. And you can find it. I think it's on our website, isn't it? The
Yes, but I will link
johnatak.co.uk.
it. I will
But
link the description
the,
below.
there's also, you can see me reading it out
I
on
will link that.
this very channel, imagine. And in there, I get into his drug use and I explain, anybody who wants to check me out, please do. You can see, I refer to the lectures where he says these things and where he talks about having been a barbiturate addict. He says he made himself a guinea pig on one of these experiments. So anyway, Nibs, 18 years old, meets his dad, and dad goes, here's a handful of speed. Lie on the couch and tell me about your last 60 trillion years. And from the conversations that Nibs, Mary Sue, and Ron Hubbard had during those 2 weeks in 1952 came the cold-blooded and factual account of your last 60 trillion years, which was originally published as a book called What Toward It, and then became Scientology, A History of Man. And you can find a video that I did with Mike Rinder about Scientology, History of Man on this very channel. And I remember Mike said, oh, let's do that. And when I came back and I said, so I've read it, he said, you've read it? It's like, yeah. I said, Mike, I haven't read a Scientology book for 40 years. You made me do this. And it's nonsense. I'm so embarrassed that I was ever involved with this thing. You know, it's like the fourth and fifth invader forces living on Mercury and sorry, on Venus and Mars. And this is the prison planet in between. So they got the horrid planets, minus 40 and plus 400 degrees that they live in. And we got the nice planet because we're the prisoners. So it's not right, is it? So
Yeah.
Nibs, from there, becomes his father's strong arm. He becomes the guy that makes things happen. And you have a series of people who are in charge nominally of the organization. So Helen O'Brien in Philadelphia in 1952 is appointed the head of the Hubbard Association of Scientologists, and she runs the Philadelphia doctorate course. Doctorate. Listen to Ron Hubbard for 6 weeks and you've got a doctorate. And it only cost $500. And only 38 people attended that course. Helen O'Brien left a wonderful memoir called Dianetics in Limbo, which is, I wept when I read it. Some of the things she said that she'd witnessed and that Hubbard had put her, and particularly her partner, John Neugebauer, through. John Neugebauer, Neuger, ended up committing suicide when Hubbard's promises failed. He's not the only one. There are a number of people in Hubbard's retinue who died at their own hands because he let them down. He made all sorts of inflated promises. So anyway, God, this is the guy never stops talking.
Classic ATAC roundabout speaking.
Yes, roundabout, called Reactive Meandering by the Jane Kember's husband, Kevin Kember, who was the head, the guardian, Jane Kember, her husband. I sent him a piece that I'd written. I was, 2021. And I sent him this piece I'd written, and he came back and called it Reactive Meandering,
Okay.
which it's just beautiful. What a wonderful compliment. So Nibs, for 7 years, will be the strong arm. I mentioned the Philadelphia doctorate course because there is actually a fight that happened there. Marshals came to arrest Hubbard, and Nibs got into a fist fight with them. And he was a big guy. And, he, in 1959, he goes to his dad. He's arranged all of the advanced clinical courses, they were called. He's been there all the time. He's been making sure what his dad wants to happen has happened. He's now, 25 years old, and he's married. His wife's called Henrietta. She typed the Hubbard's brainwashing manual. She's one of my witnesses for that, which of course he claimed had been written by Beria, the head of the Russian Cheka, the Russian, what would become the KGB. And he goes to his dad and says, look, got kids to feed, not getting enough money. Could I have some more money? And his dad says, no. And so to support his children, he left Scientology. And very soon afterwards, he started being harassed. Nobody was harassed more than Nibs, L. Ron Hubbard Jr. I wasn't. Paulette Cooper, who's the other primary target, and Tony Ortega's wonderful Unbreakable Miss Lovely is about the campaign against Paulette. And her Scandal of Scientology was one of the earlier books about Scientology. It's far from the first. It's actually 20 years after Doctor's Report on Dianetics, the first book criticizing Hubbard by somebody who worked with him, who was a medical doctor, Dr. Joe Winter. So Nibs is with him all this time, and he leaves. And for years he is harassed, and he makes various public statements. He writes a book called 1/10% of Scientology. He signs a deal with Bent Corridon to be the co-author of L. Ron Hubbard, Messiah or Madman. Now, it wasn't in Bent's interest to point out that I think 6 weeks after the contract was signed, Nibs went silent. He had nothing to do with the writing of the book, but his name is on the cover because the contract said they could do that, and it makes it look better, I suppose. And what happened at that point is L. Ron Hubbard had died, and it's about 1987. I think that's could have been 86. It was after Hubbard's death. Nibs signs a contract to do this thing and then pulls out. And the reason he does that is because Scientology, the Office of Special Affairs, has gone to him and said, we're going to exterminate you.
My God.
Or you can take, I think it was $200,000. You can take this money and you sign a statement saying you've perjured yourself, that nothing you've said is true. Now, in talking to Nibs' son, who we met at Toronto and who we won't mention by name, he said that every time his dad answered the door, he had a gun behind his back
I remember him
because
saying,
of the amount of harassment he'd received.
yeah.
And so Nibs also assigned all of everything he'd written to Scientology for this contract. So when he died, I'd say, I think in 1991, and they cleared out his apartment, his family found another manuscript
Mm-hmm.
called The Telling of Me by Me. And they decided that they would share it with me. I've been saying for some time, actually, that I'm one of only 6 people that has this manuscript. I actually dragged it out the other day, quite by accident, actually. I wasn't sure it was that I found. I shouldn't say that, should I? Because I'm meant to be very precise and exact and have a library of material and all that. But I found this envelope with it in, and it's like, oh, yeah, I wonder where that had gone. And apparently I'm one of only 4 people that has it. Jamie DeWolf,
Mm-hmm.
Hubbard's great grandson, and he is great. I love
Oh,
Jamie.
yeah. We love Jamie.
Yeah. But he has it, and he has read parts of it in his stage act
Mm-hmm.
over the years. I don't think last time I talked with him, I don't think he's doing anything particularly now that relates to that.
No, he's encouraging youth and beat poetry. I've been keeping loose look on him, and he's doing some great work in the world of beat poetry,
Yeah. Beat poetry, slam poetry.
slam poetry. Sorry,
Yeah, that's quite all
slam
right.
poetry, not beat poetry.
So in this horrifying manuscript, Nibs Hubbard, L. Ron Hubbard Jr., says all sorts of things that that just cannot be true.
Hmm.
And this has been a very long route to get to this point, but we have got to this point. So I'd like to thank the 3 people that have been patient enough to keep watching through to here. Oh, thank you so much. And in it, he said something. I mean, I got this manuscript about 2014, somewhere back there, and read it and went, okay, this is a guy who's signed a statement of perjury. So everything has to be taken with a pinch of salt. And Nibs himself says, look, I'm a chip off the old block. You know, I'm like my dad. So don't get, it's a bit like Sean McCraney, who's been on the channel, you know, that you've got to be careful about what Sean says, because Sean says, you got to be careful about what I say. And Nibs has the same level of honesty that, and in the book, he talks a lot about his father's involvement with magic. Now, this is Crowleyite magic. He says his father was 16 when he first read Crowley's Book of the Law. So that would have been in 1927, thereabouts. And the Book of the Law was first published, I think, the experience he had was in 1904 that he's describing. Very short, thankfully. It's the only Crowley book I've managed to read from cover to cover. It's about 16 pages. I just find the guys, according to, we know Hubbard himself admitted that he met Jack Parsons. He talks about Jack Parsons. He calls him a brilliant man, which he was. He invented solid rocket fuel, which was used during World War II, and then on into the space program. Hubbard admits that he knew him, and when Alexander Mitchell in 1969 in the Sunday Times said, Hubbard had performed magical ceremonies with Jack Parsons. They're published. It's called The Book of Babylon. I want to underline that Scientology is I'm pretty sure of this, the most litigious organization that has ever existed. I don't believe that any organization in the period of time Scientology has existed, if we wind it back to 1950 for Dianetics, no other organization ever in that amount of time has issued as many thousand court writs. I mean, when they got the Internal Revenue Service to back off from them in 1993, they dropped over 3,000 suits that day. So those are just the ones relating to members of the IRS and that sort of thing. So they brought thousands and thousands of suits. So in 69, they go to the Sunday Times and they say, apologise. And the Sunday Times goes, do we want to spend £1 million on lawyers? And so they printed a statement, but it's written for them by Scientology. And it says, L. Ron Hubbard broke up black magic in America. So it's an admission that he was involved with Parsons. And he told various stories about he was working for US Navy intelligence or, the FBI or somebody else. And of course, you can look into Parsons' FBI files now. And at the time they met, which was in 1945, they performed the ceremony the first ceremony in January 46. The time they met, Jack Parsons had top security clearance, something that Hubbard never had any security clearance. So the idea that the FBI or the US Navy or anybody else would be trying to infiltrate his group was just ridiculous. It's a fairy story. But he was involved with that. He did try to incarnate the force of the Antichrist on earth in the Babylon working. So we have that connection. Nibs talks a lot about this, and Nibs evidently believed that his father had become the Beast 666. He's terrified of him. He believes he has personally incarnated this. Now, of course, Aleister Crowley, up to his death in, I think, 1947, claims that he is the Beast 666, upon whom the Scarlet Woman, who is pretty much the Antichrist, it's very confusing, will ride. And then he dies. And that's a proof, if you die, that you're not the Beast 666. Mm-hmm. It's also proof, in Hubbard's case, that you're not Maitreya. But Nibs believed that his father really had incarnated the demonic, devilish, satanic force. And of course, at the very end of his career, there is a bulletin from the 5th of May 1980 that was only released on the highest level of Scientology. In 1988, he made good and sure he was dead and gone before anybody got their hands on this. And in this, Ron Hubbard claims that he is working alongside Lucifer and the Antichrist, that the real objective of Scientology is to destroy Christianity, because Christianity is the work of the Markabians, so an invading force, and that the second coming will be an alien invasion. That's what it said in this thing. And for the first week, when this was released, OT8, only to, of course, a few tens of top-level Scientologists who've paid an inordinate amount of money to get to this. We're talking hundreds of thousands of dollars. I met people who'd spent millions. And now, we've got people like Trish Duggan, who's supposed to have given $360 million to these people. Bless her. For what purpose, we won't find out. This very sensitive statement that the purpose of Scientology is destruction of Christianity was withdrawn within a week of the release of the course. Now, we verified the issue itself with Jesse Prince, who at the time was the head of Scientology technology, and two people who did the course have made statements about it. Mm-hmm. So this is what he said. This is what he thought was going on. And this is who he was. So Nibs is right when he points this out, that is what his father's conceit was, that he believed himself to be this. We've been leading up to this one statement, and we're going to get there anytime soon. This is one of those videos like you get, an hour into the video and they say, now buy the book. But I'm not going to do that to you. No, honestly, I am at some point going to get to the, once the cliff has been hung onto long enough. In The Telling of Me by Me, Ron Hubbard Jr., who changed his name to Ron DeWolf for fairly obvious reasons, says that the same man who gave the magic to Hitler gave it to Ron Hubbard. And it has been my folly to read everything I can get my hands on about the Nazis and magic. And a lot of it's bullshit. And we put up a video the other week, which gets into some of that. So I'm not going to repeat everything I said there. But there is absolutely no doubt whatsoever, historians do not disagree, that Heinrich Himmler set up a ministry, the Ahnenerbe, which had 50 departments and cost a fortune, in the attempt to prove that the Aryan people were a distinct race, descended from the gods, who had created everything that was culturally valuable in the world. So they were the aristocracy in Egypt, in India, in China, and in Tibet. And of course, Himmler sent an expedition to Tibet. He also had one of his spies, I think it's Heinrich Harrer. There's a movie called 7 Years in Tibet starring Brad Pitt. And what they really don't get into is that Heinrich Harrer was a member of the SS who befriended the Dalai Lama. The Dalai Lama has had some pretty difficult friends, you know, including Keith Raniere and Osahara, the founder of Aum Shinrikyo. I think Osahara gave him $2 million, and I think Keith Raniere gave him $1.25 million. And I say that with some sadness, having read 4 of the Dalai Lama's books and found them very interesting. But he should be a bit more choosy about his friends, I think.
Are they friends or are they paid photo opportunities?
I think when you have the prestige of the Dalai Lama, that you ought to be careful about
I agree.
how you choose your friends or photo opportunities.
Yeah.
There's a picture of him with Osahara.
Yeah.
And in fact, the first time that Nexium offered him money, he turned it down. And then he went, how am I going to pay for all these monks in Dharamsala? I have the money. So very sad, very unfortunate. Let's just put that back. So L. Ron Hubbard got the magic from the man who gave it to Hitler. Well, yeah, Himmler was mad crazy. The Ahnenerbe was doing all this stuff. He created the Lebensborn. And there are various numbers. I've seen 8,000 to 20,000 children born in the Lebensborn, where SS officers were being bred with blonde-haired, blue-eyed women. I don't know why eugenics always goes this way. Galton, who invented it, was the same. You have smart men and pretty women. They breed. It's like, couldn't we have some smarts on both sides, you know? And obviously the Aryans of Atlantis weren't that intelligent, because the reason they lost their electron powers, their superpowers, according to Himmler, is because they miscegenated. They bred with the lesser beings that they met, being the descendants of gods, and having come down in shards of ice from the heavens 2.5 million years ago, according to Madame Blavatsky. And I have been criticised by one theosophist already for saying this, but that's what she says. It's in the secret doctrine. And they miscegenated with creatures who were covered in red hair. So you go, orangutans. Now, I don't want to help to breed back beings that were stupid enough to have sex. You know, orangutans are wonderful creatures. They're amazing. But anybody that wants to have sex with an orangutan, they've got something seriously wrong with them, and there's no point trying to rescue them racially. So if that's what Aryans are, watch out. So he's trying to breed that back so that they'll have superpowers. This is a really important point, that swathes of Nazi money went into finding the Holy Grail, finding the Tibetan ancestors of the Aryans. There's the Finnish expedition, there's the Swedish expedition. There are all sorts of digs all over Germany. A huge amount of money was spent on developing this idea, which is a fundamentally occult or magical idea, because the idea is to return magical powers to the descendants. And of course, you know, as we've said before, one of the members of ABBA was a Lebensborn child and will have been paid. It's Anna Fried, isn't it? You're the person who told me who it was. She will have been paid compensation by the Norwegian government for the awful treatment that Lebensborn children received after the war, which is, and shame on you, Norway. I always thought Norway was a really good place, but not so sure now.
I'm just thinking, why would you want magical powers? What magical powers would you want? Because I can't think of a single magical power that wouldn't be a curse in and of itself.
But you
Invis
were a neo-pagan and you sought to have prophetic powers, didn't you?
Not really. No, I was, for
You
me, it
didn't
was,
use tarot to prophesize?
no, I used it to figure out my own head and also maybe help other people figure out their own present head. I never tried to prophesize the future.
So you didn't believe in reincarnation?
I did briefly, and I feel rather foolish for having it had done.
But I'm trying to
But
answer your question, which is why would anybody want to have magical powers? You wanted to have them. So you know the answer. You were part of a neo-pagan magical sect.
um,
No, I just wanted to be bullied and beaten up. That's why I
well,
joined.
yeah. For me, it was about saving the world, not so much power myself. Though I was supposedly in the myth of my group going to sing the song that would make the trees sing, so I guess there is that.
Hmm.
But I just, me as today, as
No,
me,
not today, but you're asking that you're saying you don't understand it. And in the past, you had the desire for magical powers, so you do understand it.
oh,
And how people are lured into that. And of course, Scientology, the Ordo Templi Orientis, Crowleyism, Freemasonry, Rosicrucian movements, the Sufi movements, all sorts of groups teach that they can give you magical powers, insight into the future, the magical memory, as Crowley called past life recollection. Of course, you'll find that in Tibetan Buddhism and in Bonpo, the magical sects of Tibet. The dervishes, the 180 Sufi sects, there are a lot of people who are seeking magical powers. So why would you want to be able to zap your enemies with electricity? I can think of reasons, I can think of how it might be useful when the debt collector comes around to be able to frizzle them.
the
Why
only
would people want to do astral travel? Why, that's all
fair enough,
of the theosophists and the
fair enough.
anthroposophists. And of course there are people who suggest that by asking God for something, you can get it, which is a magical power.
Okay, fair enough. And I could supposedly imagine that if I really if I wanted a magical power, it would be the power to make a nice good hot casserole just appear by my side.
Good. So you believe more in the kind of Disney magic powers.
I guess so.
So the same guy, and I am going to answer this question as well at some point in the next 2 hours. The same guy, and I actually only want to go a few more minutes on this one. The same guy who gave the magic to Hitler gave it to Hubbard. Now, yeah, Himmler, Rudolf Hess, you know, Himmler, of course, was the head of the SS, the head of the Gestapo, the interior minister, ran the Waffen SS, the military group, and ordered them on their approach in Operation Barbarossa, going through Eastern Europe into Russia. The Waffen SS were ordered by Himmler, and the order exists, to kill 30 million people.
Hmm.
Right? So he's a powerful dude.
Mhm.
He's the second most powerful person in the Reich. He certainly believes in magic. He has a round table at Wewelsburg Castle, and he trains SS men in yoga and meditation. You also have all of the fascinating pagan rituals of the Nazis. So there is something going on here that is trying to draw upon chthonic forces, there's a word for you, and gnomic forces, the forces of the earth, and to use these things. Indeed, the Nazis researched weapons based upon this. When Hitler first went to the chancellery, he had a dowser go round before him to make sure there were no death rays. So there were occult beliefs going on there. And Rudolf Hess, the deputy leader of the Nazi Party, he believed in occult stuff. Hans Frank, who would be the Governor General of Poland, he believed in it. In fact, he and Hess were part of the Tool Society, which we've mentioned before, which is where the Nazi Party was founded, which is, Dieter Eckart, who Hitler called his mentor, was a member of this group, which is usually described as an occult group. I mean, I'd love it if somebody would come forward and tell me what they actually did. I've so far only seen one description of a rather childish ceremony that they performed. One would be interested to know if they had processes and procedures like the ritual magic of Crowley or the auditing practices of Hubbard. Don't know yet. But so I've scoured the literature, and eventually, I think it was in 2006, somebody came across a book that was in Hitler's library. And it was dedicated to Hitler by the author. The English translation is Magic, History, Theory, Practice by Dr. Ernst Schertl. And it's pointed out it wasn't translated until then. But it has the book plate from showing that it's from Hitler's library, and it has 60 annotated passages in it. So I got quite excited when I found out about this book. I thought, oh yeah, finally we've got something that could connect this statement that Nibs made. Now I'm going to disappoint people. Because as far as I can tell, there is no direct way that Hubbard could have got this, because he didn't speak German. Even though he claimed that anything you've done in a past life you'll be able to do, he didn't actually speak any languages other than English. He claimed to speak Japanese and Tagalog when he was in the Navy, but he didn't. He didn't. When the Sea Organization got stuck in a Spanish port, and there were 200 people on board, and he said this thing about anything you've done in the past you can now do again. Nobody in the crew could speak Spanish. None of them could reach back into their past lives. So I don't think that he will have read this book. It's not impossible that somebody who did read German told him some of the content in it. What's interesting about it is that this isn't a book like a Crowley book telling you what spells and curses you can use, or how to interpret the tarot. This is, or the relationship between the deities of different mythologies, different past religions. This is a book by a psychologist. Dr. Ernst Schertl also was a sexologist. He wrote books about sadomasochism and things like this. And when Hitler came to power, he left Germany. In 1933, he left. But when he'd seen that he was probably going to be okay, he went back and he gave a copy of the book to Hitler. And you have his signature is reprinted in this book. I'm just flicking through it here. He explains some fundamental things. I was really surprised when I read this book. I'd expected it to be, spells and smells and things like that, bells and smells. But he actually explains some fundamental ideas. This is one of the passages that Hitler marked. We don't take into consideration that our norms of reality and imagination, of true and untrue, of healthy and sick, are indeed relative, and that there can be conditions of the soul where these concepts literally turn around. So, imagination and reality. And this led me to what I think is one of the most significant understandings I've had of people like Ron Hubbard, Aleister Crowley, Madame Blavatsky, Rudolf Steiner, and Carl Gustav Jung. They all of them believed their imagination. Hubbard says it. There's a Dianetic axiom, which we'll try and dig out before we put this up, where he says that imagination is simply the reconstruction of past events. And that means that anything you think is true. Anything.
Yeah.
And so if you then add an e-meter to that, and you say, well, there was an emotional charge, there was an electrical charge, your resistance, the resistance of your sweat glands changed. So it's true. That's when it happened. And you can demonstrate on an e-meter fairly quickly. In fact, you can show that you can get the meter to read on absolute nonsense on people. So it's not a precision instrument. It's not even a particularly useful instrument,
And
frankly.
even just left alone, like your buddy did when they went off to the pub and just
The
let
rock
it
slam.
run. Yeah.
Yeah. Uh, yeah, 50% of the reads on the Scientology meter were self-generated.
Yeah.
And the rock slam, I saw rock slams on e-meters with no electrodes plugged in. So obviously the meter was doing it. And it's because the carbon potentiometer, the tone arm, would shed little specks of carbon every time it was moved, and they get into the wiring. And and it goes crazy every now and then. Didn't stop Hubbard from putting, I think it was a third of the whole Sea organization were put onto the rehabilitation project force because they were list one rock slammers, because they'd had rock slams. And we have to say yet again that Otto Roast, when he went through Ron Hubbard's folders in, I think, 70, 71, found 200 rock slams, which Hubbard had originally said, find the basic thing that you've got to get rid of on somebody's case, which is the rock. Most Scientologists have a misunderstood word on the rock. They think he's an actor. But it is, in fact, a lump that's the basic of these things. He then changed his mind and decided it denoted evil purposes. So when Otto pointed out to him, and I interviewed Otto at great length over the years, we had 3 days of interviews when I started back in '84. We got them somewhere. We ought to put them up online. Interviews
Yeah.
with John McMaster, with Otto. They're quite interesting, really. But so he turns around to Hubbard and says, well, by the way, Ron, you've got 200 rock slams in your folder. And the next thing he knew, he's standing on the dock with his passport. And off he went. And this is the man who did OT8. He was the only person to do OT8 before 1988. And he was one of only 5 Class 12s, highest level of Scientology training, to be trained by Hubbard himself. And they threw him out. But
Of course.
this thing about imagination reality becomes extraordinarily important if we look at Christian Churko's idea of internal reality control. Who decides what the world means? Who tells you what the world means? If you can get into somebody's imagination and monkey with it, then away we go. And that is indeed what happened. So what I would say is, I don't think anybody gave the magic to Adolf Hitler, apart from Schertl. I don't think, by the time by the time Hitler gets this book, he's already Chancellor of Germany. So it wasn't what led him on his path. And I haven't found anything in Mein Kampf or any of his statements that would lead me to believe he had magical thoughts. He believed in the Aryan people and stuff like that. But he actually was very dismissive of Himmler's ideas later on. So we started out, with this tantalizing thing of, did he get it from the same place? And let's conclude by saying, no, he didn't.
I will say the imagination and reality thing, I think we've mentioned this before, that I was in a Crowley-esque ritual group, and our leader maintained that there was no such thing as fiction, that J.R.R. Tolkien, C.S. Lewis, all of these very creative guys actually lived past lives in those universes and were incorrectly remembering, and that's why they wrote those books.
I think the same is true of all the Disney movies. They have actually happened. The Ewoks are true. Cinderella is true.
They just give them an impossibly happy ending.
And Hobbiton in Middle Earth, yeah, I've been there, And there are small creatures with hairy toes.
Anybody rich enough to go to New Zealand can go and visit it.
Well, yeah, I don't believe that that's really what he was thinking about. I was in Cape Town in 1996, and we were driving up north of Cape Town, very beautiful place. And there are these trees with their roots coming down to the road.
Yeah.
Ents. They look like ents, the walking trees in
Oh, yeah.
Lord of the Rings. Now, of course, this is where Tolkien came from. He was 4 years old when they moved to Moseley in Birmingham. But so, yeah, maybe it is that those trees, when he was 4, they used to walk around. So maybe that's true.
Or he just saw them rocking in the wind as a child and didn't quite understand.
Or it's to do with mangroves,
Eh,
because they look like they might walk about, don't they? And
yeah,
apparently
well,
they're much more healthy for the planet than any other tree, the mangroves. So
all
plant some in
right.
your, yeah, build a swamp in your backyard and put some mangroves in it.
My backyard already is a swamp, but we won't get
Yeah.
into
There you
that.
go. Just plant some mangroves and away we go. The, yeah, the thought about imagination having to come from reality. Of course, you can combine elements of reality. And when we talked about this before, I pointed out that if you look to the paintings of Hieronymus Bosch,
Hmm.
then see if you can get it's the Temptation of St. Anthony.
Yeah, I've put that up on screen the last couple of times you've.
Yeah, it's in Lisbon, and I didn't see it when I was there, but there's a copy from one of his pupils, one of his apprentices, an exact copy in Brussels. And when Yuval Laor and I went there, we just stood looking at this thing. It's just like, oh, look at all this stuff. Amazing. So I think we are capable of imagination. I think that that is the human superpower.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
And that, so when Jung and all of these people think, ah, this must have happened, there must be a fish head with 2 human legs somewhere walking around. They're wrong.
Yeah.
And that's fairly simple. All right. So that's I don't know if you're going to be able to find these illustrations, and I'm not going to break the book so I can copy them. But that is the book plate, I think, Adolf Hitler, which comes from the front of his copy of this book. 60 annotations, very interesting. And somebody suggested, well, it could have been anybody who 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 made these marks in the book. But the only other person who would have spent much time in Hitler's library was Eva Braun, and Eva Braun read magazines. She didn't read books. I'm sorry, I don't mean to be insulting to the lady who was murdered by Hitler just after they got married, which is
No.
nice. It's nice romantic
Dis
ending to the Third Reich.
Most disappointing wedding night ever.
And this is Ernie Schertl's dedication to Hitler, written in the copy of the book. So, as I say, the guy's he's a really smart guy. I don't agree with him, but I get the thing. Reading Crowley, I get the idea that he's a smart guy. He's highly educated, but he fancies himself far too much, and he loves confusing people. And I don't know. I don't think I'd have liked him much. With Hubbard, I'm afraid I don't have that idea. I don't think he was particularly. He certainly wasn't educated. He wasn't well read. Recently, I've been back through lectures from the early 1950s, and my way of doing this is to look at the index and read it, because I'm not reading the damn lectures. And I started finding that in every lecture series, he mentions the same people and he tells the same stories, because he knows nobody's going to come back for another lecture after they've seen him and been bilked out of their $500. So there we are. Ron Hubbard Jr., and Dr. Ernst Schertl, and their happy times together. I think that about says it for today. We would like comments. We would like questions. If you're rude, we won't publish your comment. We'll take it down. But if I've made a mistake, please, I don't have that thing about, oh, you mustn't put me right. As long as you're nice about it. I really want to be correct in what I'm saying. And, that's been a central feature when the late Dr. Kathleen Mann said, oh, a typical John Atack paper with no references. It's like, I went away and I counted, because you can. And there are over 1,100 reference notes in Let's Sell These People a Piece of Blue Sky. So if you want to check what I'm saying, you can go and look at the original sources. I am fastidious about that. And That means if I've made a mistake, find anything that's wrong in my work, please let us know.
Oh,
So,
yeah.
in the words of Ron Hubbard, thank you for listening. I write just for you. I write just for you. Really. I don't care who you are. Send me the check immediately, as Private Eye put in their obituary of L. Ron Neasden. The river flows into the ocean flows out of the sea. Send me your check immediately. It was something like that. L. Ron Neasden, deceased. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you, Spike, for your patience. And I did let the woman talk this time, for our commentator who said, let the woman talk. She's called Spike. It's polite to refer to people by their name. The woman. I think I'm going to call you the woman from now on. So, thank you very much, everybody. Hi, John here. Thanks for watching. We'd appreciate it very much if you would click like, as well as subscribe, and click the bell for notifications. Every dollar helps, and we welcome new patrons on Patreon, or you can make a one-off payment with any currency through PayPal. Thanks so much.